Welcome back to the Menagerie. Today's monster is a demonstration that it doesn't require multiple victims to become infamous. Wolfgang Lopil was born on May 14, 1962, in Hainburg, Austria. An only child, most of his life was generally unremarkable. No events of particular note come up in research until the day of March 2, 1998, when he kidnapped 10-year-old Natascha Kampusch on her way to school. She was taken to his home in Strashof, Austria. This home was built by Lopil's grandfather after World War II due to fears of nuclear attack during the Cold War years. Both his father and grandfather built a fallout shelter under their garage. Natascha was kept in this dungeon for 8 years. Not only was she forced to carry this man's child, but the man himself was also obsessed with Hitler and the Nazis. Because of this fascination, he forced Natascha to endure beatings, starvation, having her head shaved, and intense, constant, heavy manual labor during her time in captivity. At the time of her escape, she weighed approximately the exact same amount as she did when she was kidnapped at 10 years old. The nightmare did finally end when Natascha escaped his clutches when Lopil became distracted with a phone call while he was forcing her to clean his car. Natascha ran. The escape did lead to a police chase in which Wolfgang was able to evade capture, but he then went on to commit suicide by throwing himself in front of a train near Wien Nord station. Frankly, the only positive thing I can say about this monster is that he saved the public from having to pay for his room and board to keep him in a cage for the rest of his life. Fortunately, Natascha, now 33, has gone on to have a happy life and a successful career as both an author, a jewelry designer, and briefly as a television host. In spite of all this hardship, it is a wonderful demonstration that no matter what tribulations you've endured, there is still hope for joy and meaning in your future. Thank you again for listening. Feel free to subscribe as we explore more human monsters inside the Menagerie. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Menagerie. Sometimes vigilantism is understandable, if not justifiable. Today's monster is a perfect example of that reality. Born in May of 1986, Richard Huckel was brought to the attention of authorities through the infiltration of a dark website called The Love Zone, a haven of sorts for pedophiles to share and sell their abuses. Upon discovering and arresting the operator of the site, they operated the site using him as their alias and went on to rescue 85 children from ongoing abuse. However, one particular monster of this enclave stood out among the rest. He had a distinctive mole on his finger and a distinct greeting in his posts. More importantly to authorities was the extremity of his abuses and the sheer number of victims involved. Upon being tracked down and arrested during the holidays, due to having no criminal record and so much potential evidence to sift through, authorities released Richard Huckel to the custody of his parents until further investigation was completed. Shortly afterwards, when being directly accused by his mother of the crimes he purportedly committed, while also being fairly intoxicated, Huckel admitted to assaulting children ranging from 3 to 13 years of age. His parents immediately notified the police and requested he be placed into custody. The confession to his mother was enough to get that request granted. At trial, in total, prosecutors unveiled but believed there could be up to 200 victims all over Southeast Asia and thousands more photos in encrypted areas of Huckel's laptop, which authorities have been unable to access, as he refused to help police retrieve the encrypted data. Police were only able to find a tiny percentage of his videos and photographs. At the end of the trial, on the 6th of June 2016, Judge Peter Rook sentenced Huckel to life imprisonment on 22 counts with a minimum prison term of 25 years before being eligible to apply for parole. meaning it's possible for him to have been released in 25 years in spite of the atrocities he committed. However, fortunately, Huckle never got a chance to leave his cage and destroy another childhood. On the 13th of October, Huckle was found strangled and stabbed to death in his cell at Full Sutton Prison in East Yorkshire. The attack was described by the prosecution as, quote, a prolonged attack also designed to humiliate and degrade Huckle. All I can say to that is good riddance to bad rubbish. With that, thank you all for watching, and join me next time as we explore yet another monster within the human menagerie. I don't really know what makes this person more despicable, what he did, or the fact that he is allowed to go out into the community relatively unsupervised. In spite of the atrocities that Harold Smeltzer has committed, he has still had multiple opportunities for limited release. In other words, he's allowed out of his cage, even though he presents a clear and present danger to children he comes across. On January 24th, 1980, Smeltzer kidnapped 5-year-old Kimmy Thompson on her way to school. After abusing her, Smeltzer proceeded to drown the girl in a bathtub and dumped her body in a garbage heap. He was convicted of first-degree murder. However, in spite of this, since 2008, he has been allowed on, quote, day parole, which is akin to halfway homes in the U.S., meaning he's allowed to live his life outside of his cage, merely needing to return home every night to his halfway house and abide by the stipulations of his parole. In addition to this, in 2016, the man was granted, quote, overnight passes for a certain number of days each month. In his case, this being 1 weekend per month. This in spite of the fact that Smeltzer himself has acknowledged feeling attraction to children who cross his path since his release. To give you an idea of how ineffective the Canadian Parole Board is at dealing with monsters like this, here's a quote from his parole hearing. Quote, "You have admitted to sexually assaulting over 40 young children over a 5-year period. All a product of your meticulous planning and fantasy," the board said in its report. In spite of all this, the parole board went on to conclude, "The board is satisfied that your risk would not be undue on a further period of day parole and that your ongoing release will continue to facilitate your successful reintegration into the community." The monsters I tend to cover here are bad enough. However, it's even more terrifying when they are openly allowed out of their cages. Thank you for listening. Subscribe if you wish, and I'll see you next time as we explore more monsters in the human menagerie. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's monster's reign of terror lasted 27 years before he was finally put into a cage permanently. Joseph Edward Duncan III was born in 1963 in Fort Bragg, Indiana. His criminal acts began in 1978, according to his confessions and subsequent arrests. This began at age 15 with sexually assaulting a 9-year-old boy at gunpoint. In 1980, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for sexually assaulting a 14-year-old boy at gunpoint. 14 years later, in 1994, he was paroled, only to be reincarcerated in 1997 for violating the terms of his parole. In spite of spending only 8 years of his adult life out of prison, he is known to have murdered 8, raped 16, and molested 7 people, most of them minors. And this is just what they can tie to him. In reality, there are likely many more. Every single time he was let out of prison, he was tied to kidnappings and murders within months of being free. The beginning of the end for him was the authorities' discovery of the bodies of Brenda Groyne, her boyfriend Mark Mackenzie, and their son Slade Groyne in their home along Lake Coeur d'Alene in the city of Coeur d'Alene. When the bodies were discovered, the 2 younger children of the family, 9-year-old Dylan and 8-year-old Shasta, were found to be missing. This led to an Amber Alert and authorities searching the area for the 2 younger children. A full 7 weeks later, On July 2nd, 2005, 8-year-old Shasta was seen with an unknown man at a Denny's in Coeur d'Alene. A waitress, manager, and 2 customers at the restaurant recognized Shasta from media reports. They surreptitiously called police and positioned themselves to prevent the man from leaving. Police officers arrived at the restaurant and arrested the man, who was later identified as Duncan, without incident. Shasta identified herself to a waitress at the restaurant and to authorities, and was taken to Kootenai Medical Center for medical treatment and to be reunited with her father. Through Shasta, authorities found out that Dylan had been killed by Duncan with a shotgun. Supposedly, the murder was accidental, as though that really makes a difference. This was the final time Duncan was let out of incarceration. The crimes he was convicted of this time put him in prison for the rest of his life. In spite of being given the death penalty, the execution never happened. Instead, in March of 2021, he was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. He refused radiation treatment and chemotherapy, and then died on March 28, 2021, from brain cancer. In my opinion, he got off far too easy. Thank you all for listening. Feel free to subscribe for more monsters in the Menagerie, and I will see you all next time. Welcome back to the Menagerie. Today's monster I actually genuinely hold some sympathy for and truly hope she's found some happiness in her later life. Born in 1957 to a drug-addicted mother, Mary was attempted to be abandoned, however, was required, or rather forced, to live with a mother who utterly despised her. Due to her knack for dishonesty, her claim should be taken with a grain of salt. However, much of this has been corroborated by other sources. According to her, beyond her mother's physical and mental abuse, she was also forced into prostitution by her mother at the age of 5. No wonder her past is filled with instances of uncontrolled violence. This aggression escalated until May of 1968, when she asphyxiated 4-year-old Martin Brown, the first known victim of this budding serial killer. After the discovery and burial of the child, Belle seemed to enjoy tormenting the mother by coming by her house and asking to see Martin. At one point, Martin's mother explained to the young girl that the boy was dead and would not be coming back. Mary replied that she knew that. She just wanted to see his body in the coffin. I can't even imagine how hard such sadism must have been on the mother. There were multiple other instances of her threatening other children with murder, vandalizing buildings, and writing things on walls that were later understood to be confessions to her crimes. Her next known murder occurred at the end of July in 1968, when 3-year-old Brian Howe disappeared. Upon his discovery in the same area as Brown, his cause of death was also discovered to be asphyxiation. After multiple confessions, combined with a girl named Norma Bell acknowledging the girl's actions, Mary was finally arrested for 2 murders. In 1980, at the age of 23, she was released from incarceration. I can only hope that this one-time evil child changed into a decent woman who loved and cared for her family members. And that's all for today. Like, comment, subscribe if you found this interesting, and I'll see you all the next time we visit the Menagerie. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to the Menagerie. Today's monster is another example from Canada of a vile danger to the public, potentially being let out of his cage too soon. Too soon being before the end of his natural life. David Ennis, formerly David Shearing, destroyed 3 generations of a single family in an obscene act of violence. In 1982, then 26-year-old David Shearing approached a family camping near the Wells Gray Provincial Park. The 6 people there were Bob and Jackie Johnson, their 2 daughters, Janet 13 and Karen 11, and Jackie's parents, George and Edith Bentley. Shearing murdered all of the adults in the family with a .22 caliber rifle. He He then kidnapped the 2 children. Janet and Karen were kept for a week by this monster. He admitted to abusing 13-year-old Janet, but due to the condition of the bodies when they were recovered, it is unknown whether or not Karen was abused as well. The 2 children were then brought to the vehicle the rest of the family was entombed in, and then executed with the same rifle used to kill the rest of the family. The vehicle was then incinerated by shearing, with all 6 bodies inside. Over a year later, evidence finally pointed to David Shearing, and in November of 1983, he was arrested for the 6 murders. In 1984, he pled guilty to all 6 murders and was sentenced. The sentence was, quote, a life sentence, but he would be eligible for parole after 25 years. This, surprisingly, was the maximum sentence he was eligible to receive. Because of this lax sentencing, in 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2021, he has applied for parole. Thanks to the efforts of the surviving family members and public outcry, he is still in prison. In his 2021 parole hearing, Shearing, now David Ennis, described his motivations for murdering this entire family. Quote, I saw them as just a means to an end. I saw the 4 adults basically as being in the way of what I wanted at the time. It was just Janet, as far as I was thinking, and Karen just happened to be there. In other words, he murdered this entire family so that he could kidnap and abuse a 13-year-old girl. In spite of his incarceration, he was married to Heather Ennis in 1995. Thus, his name has been changed to David Ennis. We can only hope that the efforts of the surviving members of the Johnson and Bentley families and the wider public keep this monster in his cage until the end of his life. That's it for today's monster. Thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more characters out of the Menagerie, and I will see you all next time.